protocol in the chambers. Wear masks in the chambers. Yep, unless you're speaking, then you can
even if
pull
we're
it
6
down.
feet apart up here?
Yeah. Masks over your nose, too. We highly encourage the planning commission to wear masks at all times.
This oxycodone is going to suffocate.
How are you?
Okay.
I know.
I saw this.
We're being washed. God, I should have
you want it
stayed
back?
home.
I read the
I don't know
email.
how to Zoom.
I'm afraid
You
I'm
want me to
gonna
pass
not
it down?
connect right,
No, I already gave it to them and then emailed it.
or my internet's
Yeah,
so
I got
terrible
it,
at home, I feel like I'm gonna have this big glitch and won't be able to hear anything.
We need Mike to come to our homes and show us how to use it.
Yes.
Nice try. It really is pretty simple.
I haven't figured it out, and I cannot find a blank wall in my home. I've got stuff everywhere.
They can superimpose
Well, I don't
that
have a
behind
blank
you.
wall behind me.
You have a nice picture
You just have to
behind
be
you.
careful. You just have to be careful of what's behind you, that's all.
Everything's Halloween in my house.
Oh, well, that'll be appropriate in a couple of months.
If there's any Halloween this year. My store's still closed. And thanks for your comments on the post today, Mike, about OC 2040.
Oh, on OC 2040, yeah.
I've been putting.
I haven't gone back to see if anybody has any more questions about it. I think we're going to hear more about that tonight, as a matter of fact.
Yep.
All right, we are all set up. I think everybody is in the room, both online and in our meeting room. So I think we're ready when you are.
Okay, and I just want to make sure we've got Vern and Dirk and Tom in the conference room, is that right?
Yep, that's correct. And Patty is on
Patty's connecting at the moment.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry.
Don't see
Okay,
it yet.
are we ready to start?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
so I will call to order the Monday, July 27th, 2020 meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission. First item on the agenda is any public comment on items not on our agenda. Is there any public comment?
There's a line out the door.
Yeah. The usual line out the door, right? It's a virtual line.
I am not seeing any. We have a list of people who are joining us, and I believe they are all related to the Public Works project.
With that long list.
Okay.
Quite a list.
Yeah.
All right, then we'll move on. We have one public hearing on the agenda tonight, GLUA-20-0016, Public Works First Street Operations Center. So I will start with the ever popular script. We have one public hearing on land use applications scheduled tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Planning Commission are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearing, I will ask the commissioners whether they have any potential conflicts, such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the commissioners have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any commissioner about their disclosures. The staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedures that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. Hearing procedure steps are shown in the chart on the wall at City Hall. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any received by city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they're not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. So now we will open the public record for GLUA-20-00016, and we'll ask each of the commissioners about ex parte contacts, conflict of interest, or site visit, starting Commissioner Johnson.
I did visit the site yesterday, and it was fairly warm out there, so I saw most of the shady spots from the trees. That was the place to be. But basically just walked through the front area and visited it. Had no ex parte contact, no conflict of interest.
Okay. Commissioner Schlagenhofer.
No conflicts of interest. I had no ex parte contact, and I've been there many times, but I haven't been there recently, not in the last probably 2 months. Haven't been there.
Okay. Commissioner Guile.
None, none, and none. I have driven First Street often because the U.S. Postal used to empty out on First Street. I know the area. I know where it's going. I just didn't walk into the area.
Okay. Commissioner Stoll. You're going to need to unmute yourself. There you go.
No ex parte contact, no conflict of interest, and I did not do a site visit.
Okay. Commissioner Staggs.
I have no ex parte contact, no conflict of interest, and I'm familiar with the site.
Okay. I'm not seeing Commissioner Gage on my screen. Is she there?
She was on Zoom, and it looks like she's no longer on Zoom.
Okay, well, if she comes back on, we'll pause and ask her about the disclosures. I have no conflict of interest, no ex parte contacts. I have visited the site, although I did not specifically for this event and prior to this meeting, and I did take a tour of the site with city staff. It's probably been a couple of years ago now, shortly after the property was purchased. Commissioner Gage, look. There we go. Commissioner Gage, any ex parte contact, conflict of interest, or site visit?
No, none of the above.
Okay. Does any member of the audience wish to question any of the commissioners on the disclosures they've made?
Hearing none in the room.
Okay. Then we will move on to the staff report, and I'm not sure who's up for that. Is that Mr. Walter?
It is Diliana.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm Diliana Vasilieva. I'm the assistant planner for the city, and I'll be presenting the staff report for the Public Works First Street Operations Center. I might need you to click through, Laura. So the subject site is approximately 4.75 acres in size. It is located on First Street, and it's developed with an existing warehouse building and associated parking and landscaping. Go ahead. It is zoned general industrial. Properties along First Street also are zoned general industrial, and along Malala Avenue, properties are zoned general commercial. So the project includes building and site renovations to modify the property for the new Public Works Operations Facility. As part of the project, the applicant is creating an office area that's near the front of the building. And then in the back of the building, there's a fleet maintenance facility. Between the office area and the fleet maintenance area, the applicant is proposing to provide an opening within the existing building and create essentially a covered parking area that separates the office portion of the building and the fleet maintenance portion of the building. Go ahead. As part of the project, the applicant's also reconfiguring some of the parking. The parking that is shown in blue is staff and visitor parking, and the parking area in the back is actually the fleet vehicle and equipment storage area, which is shown in green on this plan. So it's treated differently than typical parking areas because it's considered an outdoor storage area that is not subject to our landscaping requirements and some of the dimensional standards for regular parking lots. And the project also includes some pretty significant building renovations, mostly to the office portion of the building that's up front. And it includes the demolition of the two kind of vestibule areas, which are up front. And that's obviously a picture of the existing building, and then the proposed building is below. Go ahead. And this is just a rendering of what the building will look like. So they're adding an ADA ramp leading down to the building. And obviously it's just much more modernized and looks more like an office building rather than the warehouse. So in our code, we have standards. We have additional design standards for office, retail, and institutional buildings that industrial buildings typically are not subject to. In this situation, even though the property is zoned industrial, because the tenant is the Oregon City Public Works Department, it's an institutional building, so it's subject to all of those additional design standards that industrial buildings typically are not subject to. So one of those standards is we require buildings to be located within 5 feet of the street, or our code provides an option where you can incorporate pedestrian amenities within the setback between the front property line and the building. You're required to provide one pedestrian amenity for each additional 5 feet of increased setback that's being requested. So because the two little bump out vestibules up front are being demolished, the building is moving farther back, approximately 75 feet from the property line, and therefore 14 pedestrian amenities are required within that front setback area to make up for the increased setback. So the applicant has proposed 10 pedestrian amenities, which are listed there, and then we have a condition of approval with a list of more options for pedestrian amenities, and a condition of approval to provide 4 more for a total of 14 to make up for the increased setback. On top of that, the application includes 3 variance requests. The first is for adding more parking in front of the building. The second variance request is to decrease the required landscape buffer for industrial uses. And then the third variance is for minimum site landscaping. These are the variance criteria. I think you're pretty familiar with them, but I'll quickly go through them. The first is that the variance is not likely to cause substantial damage to adjacent properties. The second is that the variance is the minimum being requested that would alleviate the hardship. Number 3 is that the variance will equal or exceed the purpose of the regulation being modified. Number 4 is that any impacts resulting from the variance are mitigated. Number 5 is that there are no practical alternatives that would not require a variance. And 6 is that the variance has to conform to the comprehensive plan. So the first variance is for parking in front of the building. Our code requires that parking areas are located either behind or to the side of buildings. The existing building currently has 23 parking stalls that are in front of the building. Under the new proposal, there would be 28 parking stalls in front of the building, but it's primarily due to the existing 7 stalls that are shown in blue, which currently are behind the building, but once the front portion of the building is demolished, they'll end up in front of the building. So it's not necessarily so much that they're adding new parking in front of the building, it's that the building is moving back and existing parking will end up in front of the building. So because the increased setback is already being mitigated by the 14 pedestrian amenities that we talked about, we are not requiring additional mitigation for the parking in front of the building. The project is providing the minimum staff and visitor parking that's required, so they're unable to remove some of the stalls in front of the building because then they would be under the minimum required parking. And the primary purpose of requiring parking lots to be located behind buildings is to provide more pedestrian-friendly developments and more interesting streetscapes, so you're not just, looking at parking lots as you're walking down the street. With the proposed renovations, the development is becoming much more pedestrian-friendly with the addition of the ADA ramp and the plaza and the crosswalk across the drive aisle. And obviously it is becoming a more modern and aesthetically pleasing building, adding to a better looking streetscape. So we found that the variance criteria is being met and are recommending approval of this variance. The second variance request is for the buffer for between industrial and commercial uses. So our code requires that industrial uses that abut a commercial zone incorporate a 25-foot buffer with site obscuring landscaping. So this property does abut the commercial zones to the north and to the west. To the north is the back of the Fred Meyer grocery store, and then to the west is a strip mall with a few businesses, and it's also the backs of those buildings. So rather than the 25-foot required buffer, the applicant has provided a buffer that ranges from 5 to 7 feet, as well as a site obscuring fence. Again, the industrial use abuts the backs of commercial buildings, which are not accessible to any patrons or visitors to those businesses. And on top of that, the industrial use in this case is light industrial in nature, so it's primarily fleet vehicle storage and not any uses that are noisy or generate lots of smells or anything like that. So because it's abutting the backs of those commercial properties and because it's a light industrial use, that 25-foot buffer is not as critical as it is if you were facing, the front of a commercial property and if you had a heavier duty industrial use. So that being said, we do have a condition to provide mitigation for the smaller buffer, which is to provide trees spaced no more than 30 feet apart in the north buffer area. So they're already proposing trees on the west side, but our condition also would require trees on the north to make up for the smaller buffer. We also, since one of the variance criteria is that the variance request is the minimum to alleviate the hardship, we have a condition for the applicant to demonstrate that they're providing the maximum amount of buffer landscaping possible. Laura, will you go on to the next slide? So there appeared to be some additional opportunity for landscaping. So our condition requires the applicant to either provide landscaping there or provide documentation kind of giving us justification for why they're unable to accommodate landscaping there if they need that area for, circulation of large fleet vehicles or equipment storage or anything like that. So with the condition, we find that the variance criteria for this variance also has been met. And then the last variance that's being requested is to minimum site landscaping. Our code requires a minimum of 15% of the site has to be landscaped. The applicant is proposing approximately 8% site landscaping. Again, they're providing the minimum amount of staff and visitor parking that is required by the code, so there isn't an opportunity for them to remove any parking stalls to provide additional landscaping. And then they've also provided justification for the size of the outdoor storage area and demonstrated that they're unable to decrease the size of that storage area and add more landscaping because they need all that space for the amount of fleet vehicles and equipment that the Public Works Department has. We do have some conditions for mitigation. We have a similar condition as the one I talked about before, basically to demonstrate that the maximum possible landscaping is being provided and therefore the minimum variance is being requested. So we put together this exhibit that just shows some additional areas where it looks like they could provide more landscaping, and the condition requires them to either include landscaping in those areas or provide documentation explaining why they're unable to. We also have, so because there's a smaller quantity of landscaping, we have some conditions to increase the quality of landscaping. So we're requiring shrubs spaced no more than 4 feet apart and trees no more than 30 feet apart. and ground cover in all the planters. Those are the standards from our parking lot landscaping standards, but the back outdoor storage area isn't subject to those. So in some of those areas where they're just proposing, some lawn or ground cover, we're also requiring that they beef up the landscaping in those areas. And then we have an additional condition for more mitigation, which is that 15 of the newly planted trees either have to be at least 3 inches in caliper at the time of planting. Typically, we would only require 2 inches, or they have to be a tree species which has a 30-foot canopy at maturity to provide additional shade and more aesthetically pleasing. So again, those are conditions to provide mitigation for the variance. Since they're asking for less square footage of landscaping, we're requiring more quality landscaping. Go ahead. So we find that with those conditions, all of the variance criteria have been met for all 3 variances being requested, and we are recommending approval of the application with the conditions of approval. And we do have, I handed out an email that is being added to the record, and I emailed it to the commissioners who are at home. It is from our assistant city engineer, Josh Wheeler, just providing additional explanation for condition number 6, which pertains to stormwater requirements for the existing fuel station facility that's on site. The condition itself is not changing, but he just wanted to add some of that background information for why it's worded the way it is into the record. And I can answer any questions.
Okay, so do we have any questions from commissioners? Let's start with Commissioner Staggs.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, Commissioner Stoll?
No questions.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer?
Yeah, I had a question on the pedestrian amenities. The reason we're doing 14, or we're requesting 14 amenities, is because of the distance from the street. If it was close enough to the street, we wouldn't be requiring any of them, or how many would they have to do?
So the requirement is that the building has to be within 5 feet of the street. If you're within 5 feet, you don't need any. For each additional 5 feet that you move back, you have to incorporate 1 amenity. So in this case, because they're 75 feet back, 14 were required, but it would just depend on how close the building is to the street.
Okay, yeah, it just seems like a lot, and I guess my question is, do they have any visitors?
They do. It's so the building would house all of the operations staff, which a lot of them are out in the field, but also our engineers that have people come to the counter and ask questions.
Okay, I didn't know if people go there to pay any bills or anything, if there was any public. I just didn't know if the public ever showed up to that building or not.
That's going to be my question.
They do.
Okay, all right, because it's going to look, it's going to be snazzy when they show up, that's for sure. All right, well, that was all I had. Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson?
No additional questions at this time.
Commissioner Gott?
Okay, you know me, always questions. That's my role as on a planning commissioner to ask the uncomfortable questions. First off, I agreed with Dirk's question about visitors, I can't imagine that we have that many visitors. It's not like the planning department where people come in and present plans and do all the rest of it. This is Public Works. And I don't understand why you need that many parking for, it doesn't seem to have visitors that often in there. And I agree, it seems like an awful big effort. On the tail of that is, I can't believe for a Public Works building that we had to go through all those different changes or variances that you're talking about. I understand that we have to meet codes, but this is a Public Works building. I look at what Public Works was, and we're going, it seems, to an extremes. This is gonna look nicer than City Hall is gonna look. I'm looking at the pictures and all that. Where is the funding coming to make this Public Works look like a City Hall? It just can't, I can't believe it. It parks trucks to do things and it does other stuff for the city, but sorry, John, but why does Public Works have to look like a Taj Mahal? I'd like an explanation, because that we're using taxpayers' money for this, and it seems like you're shaking your head. It seems like we're using a lot of money to make this look, again, like Taj Mahal. I don't understand it.
So will whoever's going to be presenting from the applicant, please be sure to address Commissioner Giles' concern when you present.
I don't think
it okay with you,
Mike, I don't think anybody can. I just think it's a big waste of money for a Public Works building. It's not the City Hall.
There is a technical question in there related to this land use review, so our Assistant City Attorney, Carrie Richter, can talk about that.
Well, I think the first point about, I just want to caution you that questions about your purview is limited to the approval criteria. So we want to keep that in mind, that questions about, whether the building looks too nice or whether or not it's a good expenditure of public funds is sort of beyond the purview of the limited review, which is limited to these criteria. So I think that I'm happy, the applicant can certainly respond, but questions about how many pedestrian improvements there have to be given the distance of the building to the street is a code-related question that is germane, but the code is the code. And so unless the applicant wanted to get a variance from the requirement to provide that many pedestrian amenities because the public doesn't go to the building, that would be a choice they could make, but that's not a choice they made in this case.
Okay, so for my public statement, I've been on this planning commission for 7.5 years. Carrie and I continually disagree on these kind of things, but I'm also somebody who, just like the city commission would be, that would ask the questions about funding, all that. And so maybe I don't belong here, because I don't like us wasting city money and the taxpayers' money. So if that's wrong to ask that question, then I don't belong in this seat. I should leave.
So I can answer your technical question. So in the code, we have chapter 1762055, which applies to office buildings, which is the front component of
I agree
this.
with all the variances. I just can't understand the money we're putting into this. It's a Public Works building for big trucks and things like that. That's my point.
Right. So in the land use review part of it, though, there's sort of a dual component thing. So one, for all institutional buildings are subject to the commercial office design standard. So it's by user, not by use. So that is a little bit strange in this case. Say, in this case, we do have an office component up front, and they didn't do a whole lot of changes to the warehouse in the back, but say they were building a new one, that would have been a really kind of a clunky part of this review. But in this case, they had office up front. But our code, as it stands today, does apply those higher degree of design standards because of the user, not the use specifically. So
I just hope the rest of the city commission watches my objections and what I'm saying about this, because they may not watch all these, but I hope they do, because that's my objection. If it's not going to get to the city commission, somebody has to ask those questions. I know we're here for code review, and I understand everything that you presented, and it makes sense. But it seems to me that we're putting an enormous amount of money into something that's a Public Works building. Again, sorry, John.
Commissioner Guile, anything else?
Oh, I think I've said enough.
Okay. Commissioner Gage, any questions?
Yes, I just have one. In regards to number 3, the minimum site landscaping, what is the current percentage of landscaping on the site right now? Anybody have that info by chance?
I'm not sure about the current percentage, but it is decreasing because there's on the west side of the property, there's a big landscaped area that is decreasing in size to make space for the outdoor storage area.
Okay, I was just curious as I realized that we were cutting the amount of required landscaping almost in half. And so I was just wondering where it stood now. That's all.
Anything else?
No.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. That 8%, is that 8% calculated on the entire site?
Yes.
Okay, so then the visible portion, and I guess like across the front of the building, across where the gate is that separates the public accessible portion from the storage yard. If they're proposing 8% on the total site, then what they're proposing that's public facing in front of that gate in the building would obviously be way more than 15%, right?
I'm not sure if it would be way more than 15%, but
well, it's less than half. It's less than half of the site space, so I think it would have to be more than. I think it'd have to be at least 15-16%.
Yeah, aside from, aesthetic benefits of landscaping that the public would be seeing when they're going to the building, there's also stormwater and shading and cooling benefits. So even if the landscaping in the back part of the property behind the gate is not visible to the public, it still is providing those benefits for the entire site. So we're not only concerned with what it looks like, but also the additional benefits of landscaping.
Okay, thank you. I just got just a quick typo that probably needs to be corrected so that our records are all right. On page 10 of your report under condition number 32, it talks about the contribution from this development to the 213 Beaver Creek interchange, and it says $6,752 in both places, and I think the per trip number should be $211, like it says, and it is correct later on in your report, but right there it says $6,752 per trip, which isn't right.
Thank you. You are right. We will get that fixed.
Okay. Any other questions from any of the commissioners or staff?
I have one new one.
Okay.
That vegetated area on the west side that they're going to remove and add a bunch of parking, are there any cut and fill issues with that? Is it a raised area? Is there a hole there? Does it not matter because we're not near a river?
Yeah, it wouldn't matter. I think what you're thinking of probably is the floodplain standards that require a balance of cut and fill. In this case, it would just be subject to, like grading and erosion control standards.
Okay. All right, and they're not taking too much dirt out. They don't have any issues with that?
No, it might trigger getting a grading permit, depending on that threshold of how much they're removing, but there's no land use criteria.
Okay. All right, didn't look like there was an NROD issue there. I didn't see any habitat anybody was complaining about, so.
Yeah, no overlay districts on this one.
All right, sounds good, thank you.
I do have a question for Diliana.
Okay. Mr. Johnson.
You mentioned something when you were talking about the landscaping and the benefits and what you can see from the public can see, and you mentioned the gate. They wouldn't be able to see what's behind the gate, does that mean that petition or that gate that's there now is going to change and become more of a solid wall petition that you cannot see behind there?
I believe it will just be a chain link fence with slats. I'll let the applicant verify if I'm wrong on that.
Okay,
So yeah, it'll have
you put
slats and the chain link.
Put slats in there, or landscaping in front of that fence possibly to block the view behind it partially, or, so that'd be a good question for
Yeah, there's some existing landscape planters in front of the fence, and then some new landscape areas behind it.
All right, thank you.
Anything else for staff from the commissioners? All right, we will move on to the applicant presentation. If you need a little more than 15 minutes, this is the only hearing on our agenda tonight, so I don't have my meter running, but so if you need a few more minutes, go ahead. And if you would, everybody who presents, if you would please start with your name and your city of residence. Thank you.
No, that sounds great. Thank you for having me. My name is Brandon Dole. I'm the project manager for Scott Edwards Architecture. I am actually an Oregon City resident as well. So I just want to state that we're very excited to be here in front of the commission tonight. I think this is our 11th month that we have been working on this project. So it's a big milestone. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this, and just want to acknowledge the staff efforts from planning and also from development services. We've obviously gone through the process, the pre-app, but we've also had multiple meetings with them, reviewing the application, reviewing the conditions, and there's just been a lot of work on both sides. So just an acknowledgement of that. I don't really have a formal presentation for you tonight. We've gone through as a project team and reviewed all of the conditions. And as a group, we're not objecting to any of the conditions. We think they're all standard and typical and everything that we were kind of envisioning for the project. So what I'd really like to do is address your guys' questions. I think there's been 4 or 5 that I could maybe respond or add to, and then open it up for discussion. So if you guys are okay with that, Deliana, do you mind opening up just the site plan? We'll pull that up. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions unless you guys have a particular focus you want me to start on. So with regards to landscaping, I think one of the first questions I heard was, what is the existing condition? So right now the site currently meets the 15% landscape coverage requirement. If you've looked at the existing site in the aerial image, that existing patch of landscaping that is within the fence yard was the prior owner's way of meeting that 15% landscaping. So we are inherently removing all of that, which would get us to about that 8% mark. A couple points I'd like to make and clarify. That 8% does not include any of the stormwater facilities. So we provided an exhibit within the narrative that highlighted the stormwater facilities throughout the site as well as the landscape. So the 8% is really just those landscape areas, not stormwater facilities. So yes, a reduction. The other question was regarding the chain link fence. So right now the chain link fence, it's existing, pretty much will stay and remain as is. Our intent is to add site obscuring vinyl slats to that fence, right? That main gate that you see to the west of the site, that is the main in and out, if you will. Now we envision the site being used as a loop. So public works fleets would come into the west, they would loop around the back end of the building and exit on the east side of the site. That existing gate has landscaping on the south side, so on the public, on the right-of-way side of that fence. In the application as one of the conditions of approval, planning staff has asked us to look at adding some additional landscaping on the north side of that fence, would then also contribute to the screening ability of that fence. So hopefully that's clear with the 2 landscape questions. Commissioner Giles, I really can't speak to the dollars. I'm not the money guy. I'm the design guy. But I will just point out that this is more than just a public works facility. You have the parks the city's Parks and Recs facility moving to this site. You also have the engineering department, which they're currently housed here in City Hall. They will also be moving to this facility. So it's more than just Public Works. Our target is a Class A office building, much like you have here at City Hall, that will also accommodate all of the operational needs for Public Works. So hopefully that's clear with our intent. Staff mentioned that as part of the application and site design and review process, we are held to certain design standards. So part of that removal of those, the vestibules on the south end of the site, our intent is to really meet those design criteria and also give the city a brand new facility. If you guys recall, the city purchased this property with the intent on fully removing that existing office building and constructing a new office building. When we first got hired, the first thing that we did as our due diligence was wave the budget flag, right? Spent a lot of time, as most good developments they start with money. So we quickly, as a team, identified concerns with the existing program and budget, and quickly came to the conclusion that we really needed to reuse as much of the existing facilities as possible. So inherently trying to get the best bang for the buck. The whole reason we're here today is to hopefully describe to you that the site in itself is undersized. If you go back to 2005, when the city really started looking at their current public works infrastructure and trying to find a new home for them, it was quickly determined that, with the size of our community and the entity that would house the facility, you really need about an 8 to 10 acre site. So as you know, we're about half that. We're 4.75 acres. So our very first charge was use as much of the site as possible. Knowing that it really only gets us halfway there, which is why we're here today, right? We've requested 3 variances in an effort to maximize that site. We're not getting every vehicle on the site. We're not getting every piece of equipment on the site. Our goal is to get as much on as possible, and we think we're there with the plan that you see in front of you today. We know that there will be vehicles that are parked at other site facilities, potentially currently the facility on South Center Street, Mountain Home, the reservoir, and even potentially the cemetery. I may have missed 1 or 2 questions. Commissioner Mitchell, you may have had a question that I missed.
No, I think my question was covered. Mr. Lewis, it looks like you want to add to the presentation. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to address the couple things. First of all, this project is funded through our utility and street fees, so gas taxes, water fees, sewer fees, stormwater fees. That's how we acquired the site, and it's been through years of savings that we're able to afford the work that we're doing here. I did want to address a little bit about the concern for the look of the building. I think the front facade is, there's been a lot of effort put into that. And Brandon, would you talk a little bit about all the articulation and the energy that goes into that? And a lot of that was code driven as far as I'm concerned. And so while we're looking for, most of our finishes are very, well, I guess they're middle of the line. They're finishes that can be easily maintained, not requiring a lot of painting, things like that. The windows, there's specific square footage requirements for windows. So Brandon can talk about that a lot. I guess I just want to be sure to address the fact that there's no mosques. So the Taj Mahal is not the standard we are headed for. No mosques, no minarets on this particular building. We're pretty much living within the existing concrete tilt-up building, with a couple of exceptions to that. And most of the costs associated with this are really associated with redesigning that building to be office space as opposed to a beer warehouse, right? So we are gutting much of the interior of the building just to make one of the things that's important to us in this project is that we meet a high standard for any kind of seismic event. So the bracing of the establishment of new foundations or foundations that help support that. The roof diaphragm, replacing that is critical to us. But on the outside of the building and pretty much most of that building, we've made a lot of decisions not to tear down existing warehouse space and find ways to reprogram that for our needs. The yard grading is quite a bit different in the sense that instead of, if you notice that building, a lot of that building, there's a elevation difference between the outside of the building and the floor of the building. So we've asked our design team to grade that in such a way that we will be able to approach and either walk into that building or drive into that building. So I just, I want to be real careful because we totally understand the resource needs for a project like this, and the any storyline that might suggest that we're asking for something like the Taj Mahal is an overshoot. I mean, I think we're looking at good materials that will last a very, very long time. We've heard that the desire is for a 50-year building, so we've got good building materials to do that with. But most of the look of the building, as far as I'm understanding, I'm very interested in a good-looking building, a building that visitors and staff can come to and feel, proud of that building. But I just really think that some of the things that you may be seeing that look like, highlights or, expensive things are mainly code-driven. And so, Brandon, can you talk to that?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you, John. Two things. So I mentioned that, the original intention was to build a new building. So we put a lot of time and effort in convincing the stakeholders, John and his group, that we could use the existing. We started out knowing we wanted to create a building that looks much different than what it does today. So let's all be clear about that. The other, with it being a use, as planning staff has mentioned, we're subject to design criteria. And part of that design criteria is elements of glazing. So there's percentage requirements for front and sides of the building, first and second floor, building modulation and undulation, how that facade kind of creates depth with itself. So the fact that we removed the single-story portions and were able to rework that facade gave us the ability to get that undulation and the modulation. Also, differences in materials. So we have to introduce more than just one mundane material into the facade to give it that architectural articulation that planning is looking for. So there are just basic design criteria that are the drivers for the building, beyond the fact that we want to give you a new facility. The other thing that I would say, when our group specializes in public projects. Public projects, we know, are always complicated by challenging budgets, challenging schedules. So when it comes to finish selection, we know that we have to start with materials that are durable and that are cost effective. We're not designing a country club. We're not designing a very nice private residence. We're designing a public facility that needs to take the use and abuse from the Public Works operations crew first and foremost. Then we want to also give you a facility that will stand the test of time, will be more than a 50-year building, but also live through trends. So when we look at materials, we try to pick neutral palettes and colors so that in 5-10 years, you're really not doing an overhaul with the material selection. We really start out with some basic drivers just to make sure that when we do get that question, when we end up with a good product that looks nice, to us, we've won, because we've already implemented drivers that, that we can stand by, right? Early decisions in terms of material selection. And then if we get to that building that is a very nice public facility, inherently it's a win-win, right? All renovations are difficult. But I think we put a lot of time in looking at the existing buildings, the existing structure, and reusing them. The facility has had an interesting life. For the purposes of the application, we actually broke the building into two pieces, the warehouse component and then the office building. If you look at just the office building itself, it started its life as a concrete tilt-up building, a warehouse. And then over 3 or 4 different additions had this office component attached to it. So our first task was making sure that, one, the program that Plan B and John's group, the Public Works group, established well before hiring us would actually stand the test with this building. meaning that the program would not only fit within the facility, but also fit in a way that function and flow made sense, that would make easy in terms of installation and selection of all the different building systems, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, all in which gave us some substantial savings. I believe our cost per square foot, now we haven't presented GMP, we're in the process of bidding, but when we get to that point, our original assumption is by reusing the existing building, our cost per square foot would be about half that of a new building. And what we're seeing up until this point, because we've had a contractor alongside us doing cost estimates, that seems to be holding true. Now that we're in bidding, over the next few weeks, that will come to light. The question that I did miss is a good one, and I'm glad you brought it up. It was regarding the pedestrian amenities, right?
Yes.
And I think staff and myself, we joked about this the other day, that this project will set a precedent for the number of pedestrian facilities incorporated. We knew we were making that condition worse. We knew that the way we were connecting these two existing drive aisles and connecting the sidewalk to the entrance of the building, it presented an opportunity for us to meet that criteria. I think the difficult part was actually figuring out 14 different pedestrian amenities that would make sense. With what has been suggested by planning staff, I think we can definitely get there.
Was the electric bike charger going to be one of them, or was that just one of the potential ones?
That is one of them. Yes, that is indeed one of them.
You think that'll get used?
The city right now owns, so the engineering staff has 2 electric bikes.
Oh.
So we do envision at least being used somewhat from them. Now, I will say this with a little bit of a grin. When we're talking an electric bike facility, we're really talking an outlet for a user to plug into. It's not a Tesla charging module, it's something small. But we do have that facility. It is an amenity for the public and staff to use. So we are able to check that box.
Okay, all right, that was my only concern was it just didn't seem like a building that was going to get a lot of public visits.
It doesn't.
And then you had enough public amenities for 2 city halls.
It'll be a nice plaza, let me tell you.
It sounds like it, yeah.
It will be. No, we did counts, right? So working with the engineering department, working with operations, we saw that they see on an average 2 to 3 visitors a day. So, and that is daily. They are getting individuals coming, filing applications for different development projects, inquiring about potential projects, and engineering staff readily uses their public counter. And that is a big amenity that we're providing in the new building. Operations, same. They get a handful of contractors a day that come in and are checking out different meters and working on construction projects. So there is a need. It will get used. In time, we'll see to what extent.
And then there's some people being added to the building. It was engineering and Parks and Rec. How many visits will they be using some of those parking spots too, you think?
Parks and Recs will see a minimum. You guys mostly know that Parks manages the cemetery, right? The city-owned cemetery. So a lot of the visitors that the Parks get is in regards to the cemetery and its use. Some of Parks' staff will actually maintain their current positions at the cemetery. So we don't really anticipate an increase in use from Parks. Facilities, we wouldn't anticipate an increase in use. It really is driven by operations and engineering.
Okay, and then in the parking lot design, I think I only saw 2 visitor parking spots.
Correct, yeah, because we only get, there should be 4 visitor parking spots. And that would accommodate the 2 to 3 per day per department.
Okay. All right, well, that was my concern. I think you've answered it well, so that was it for me.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, from the presenter, do you have anything else to present, or are we just down to questions? Mr. Lewis, go ahead.
Mike, one thing I just want to say, because we just said Parks and Rec, I want to be clear. So the Parks operations staff will be at this facility, and we've got provisions for 3, quote, facility staff, folks that take care of our buildings, that are also part of what used to be the community services department, and now we're calling Parks. So the rec side of the department is not going to be in this building. Just want to make that super clear.
Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from the applicant?
Yes.
I think we had one question from Commissioner Johnson.
Okay.
I've never been in the building of the office complex, and my questions are concerned are really only about the office complex. And as I understand it, when they were buying it, it was a terrible layout for, it wasn't very efficient use of office space or communications. So your project, is it to pretty much reconfigure the 2 floors of the office building that make it a better traffic flow internal for how you need to pass information through the office?
Yes, sir, that's correct. We're basically stripping the facility down to its core structure and then building it back out. Right now, the second floor that exists today really only exists outside of that concrete tilt warehouse in the middle. So what we're going to do is actually bring that second floor across the entire building. So redevelop an entirely new second floor and reconfigure the first floor all around that existing concrete tilt structure. Which was a lot of effort up front, right? I mean, that was part of the challenge, was to look at the existing facility, know the substantial savings we would have if we could reuse it, and fortunately, we were able to get it to work. The building itself presents itself in a nice symmetrical form, which just made our life easier. I think we developed 5 or 6 different schemes that we felt would work, and what we've presented today, we felt was the best option.
So as you're doing this project, my first thought was, boy, there's more office help, since I don't get into the public works end of the thing very often at all, that your big office building.
Yeah.
But there's some growth that must be planned into that also.
Correct.
As far as I think John mentioned, it's a 50-year building type thing.
Yeah, we think it'll accommodate plus. We've actually held about 3,300 square feet in reserve within the building that we're actually not building out, right? That gives you some growth capacity down the line. Say a whole new department needs to relocate to this facility. You have that in reserve. Within the space that we're building out inside that shell, we feel we accommodate the next 20 years worth of growth. And we're doing that through an office floor plan that has a mix of enclosed offices and cubicles, if you will. So through furniture design, furniture solutions, and the casework, we feel that we've accommodated quite a bit of growth without even touching that future expansion area.
Good. Yep. Thank you.
Anything else from any of the commissioners? Questions for the applicant? You just brought up something that I know none of us have a good enough crystal ball, but you brought up cubicles and open space, and then that got me going down Virus Road. Mm-hmm. Have you looked at, in terms of how much open space makes sense? And what about HVAC and air circulation? Sure. No, it's a great question. Of course, COVID hit right in the middle of when we're trying to wrap up design development. So we did take a quick pause. As an industry, a lot of information came out with how we would address this. Fortunately, just out of some, I would want to say good design, but some luck, the way we've laid out that building really gives you that one-way direction that we're seeing as an industry, right? So a lot of the businesses and facilities that are open now provide for someone to come in one door, circulate, and go out another door. And inherently, we have that quite a bit in the second floor. The second floor will house all of engineering, and so the active space will be that second floor, because engineering, their group will mainly house throughout the day, where operations, their crews are out in the field, right? So just inherently, the way we laid the building out, we'll get that circulation through. The cubicles have been in discussion. Our cubicle design will have high partition walls, so the cubicles will function kind of like an office space where you're enclosed. And then in terms of mechanical system, we have probably the most robust mechanical system you can have. We're at a system that is, top of the line in terms of efficiency and expandability. We're still working through different provisions you would put in the system to help viruses. Right now, a lot of that technology is purely just within the filters you use in the systems.
So we've addressed it. Did we completely redesign the building once COVID hit? No, but we felt as a design team and communicating with the stakeholders, we had a pretty healthy balance.
Okay, thank you. I know that's outside what we're here to decide tonight, but
great question.
I guess I had my taxpayer hat on at that moment, I guess. Any other questions from commissioners for the applicant? Okay, then are there any public comments first from any representatives of any neighborhood association?
There are no public comments in the room at all. And I believe everybody online is with the applicant. Okay, since there's no public comments, we don't have any need for rebuttal unless anybody has any other questions right now. No other questions, we will close the public hearing and we will move on to discussion and discussions from the commissioner and hopefully a motion. So we can go in order, or you can raise your hand if there's something you want to say. Well, let's just go down the list here. Let's start with Commissioner Stoll.
Everything I've read and heard sounds good. Everything seems appropriately justified for the site and for the use.
Okay, Commissioner Staggs.
I had a question for Diliana. Does the project require any kind of design review?
Not beyond, what we're reviewing with the land use application for all of the design standards for institutional buildings.
Okay, so there's no overlay that requires any kind of design review beyond what we're talking about tonight?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Schlagenhofer.
I think I've covered everything I wanted to get clarified, so I'm good.
All right, Commissioner Johnson.
Oh, I'm pretty satisfied with the whole project. I think it's a fairly complex project when you got a existing building, you got to tear it apart and put it back together and hope everything works. And so those type of things appear they have been taken care of, and Diliana's did a very good job of getting the criteria that you probably look forward to that every time she. Yeah. So I'm satisfied.
All right, Commissioner Gao.
Yeah, I have a statement to make or a disclaimer or whatever. I'm in my 7.5 year here as a commissioner, and so most of these current commissioners are unfamiliar with the commissions that I've sat on with Denise and Damon and some of the other people who used to ask the tough questions. I've learned from them not to be kind of a reticent, a quiet person when it comes to these things. They would have asked the same questions that Carrie would have questioned them on, that you can't ask that. And I learned from them, and I sometimes feel like you all feel I'm a disruptor because I ask a lot of questions and I challenge Carrie, and I challenge some of the things that are there. You would be happy if I sat on the budget committee for the city or the state or even the federal government, because I would question things. And when it came to the codes tonight and all the variances that were being requested to meet those codes, it just seemed to me that we were going to extremes. And my apologies to John Lewis, because I don't mean to call it a Taj Mahal. When I looked at the drawings look really nice. I mean, I'd like to have a home that looks like that. So I wasn't trying to offend John or anybody else. He should have a good-looking building for public works. It's just those drawings were done so well. It looked really nice. So Lori and I had quite a conversation in the back, because sometimes I don't feel like I belong here now because I'm not a yes person on every single thing. And sometimes I ask questions that are out of line that don't follow the code. But then again, that code and all those variances require that you guys put more money into it with more trees and more this and that. But I guess I'm the devil's advocate when it comes to those sort of things. And let me see what other notes. I guess that's it. Sorry, John, to call it the Taj Mahal, but those drawings were beautiful, as I said. I may not agree with all the code variances, and it's the cost on those code variances and some of the other things. But you guys did a good job. It looks good. Again, it looks great. So to my fellow commissioners, I don't mean to be the constant disruptor. You shook your head yes when I was asking some of those questions that I was supposedly not allowed to ask. But that's the kind of person I am. I ask those kind of questions. And sorry to my fellow commissioners. Don't mean to be disrespectful to anybody, but I need to ask because Damon and Denise and all that other group's not here anymore to do those kind of questions. So that's my comment. Thank you, Mike, for letting me make that.
Okay, Commissioner Gage.
I think the project looks like it's going to be a great project, and I fully support it.
Okay. Well, first off, regarding the project, I think all three of the variances make sense. There's a good justification for them, and I know it's it's been a tough compromise on a site that's smaller than I know what John would like to have, but still honored, I think, the intent of what's in our code with the variances that we're granting. So I think it's a great project. I will just real quickly address what Commissioner Giles said. And Tom, I don't think anybody sees you as disruptive. And I think you're entitled to ask any question that you want to, but a lot of times the answer is going to be it's outside our purview, outside our authority, and outside what we're allowed to decide on. And it's kind of covered in that script that I read before these hearings, that these are our laws and codes, and we have to abide by those. We can grant variances to them, but we can't ignore them. And the other thing that I'd say in this particular building, I think it's important for this planning commission and future planning commissions that we are applicant agnostic. We can't consider who the applicant is. I don't want to put this planning commission down the road or a future planning commission in a position where a private enterprise comes in and wants to do things that are not according to our code, build a plain front building and use substandard materials or whatever, and have them be able to say, hey, wait a minute, you let your own city public works department get away with it when they built their building, why can't we get away with it? So I think we need to ignore the fact of who this applicant is and abide by what's in our code. And I'll get off my soapbox. I don't want to lecture, but I think it's important that we keep our own house in order as a city and follow our own codes. So,
Mike, thank you for those comments. But I'm not the first commissioner that sat here in all these years that I've been up here that's asked questions that are outside the purview. And several times my previous commissioners have been told the same thing by Carrie or whoever. And so if I ask something outside their purview, it's because I've learned to ask something that may be pertinent to my decision making, whether it be allowing the cost for those variances or whatever. And I think it's appropriate, even if they're outside their purview, to present those kind of questions, even though I may not be able to. But other commissioners have as well over time.
Yeah, I understand that. And you certainly can and should ask those questions. And I know a lot of the time you and I have had this discussion over a beer. I know that there are times when you ask a question just so you can get the answer on the record so that people who in the community who care enough to try to find out can go back and look at the record and look at the videos. So I think that's an important thing to do. So
you're right, Mike, because as I discussed with Lori,
what you're doing is out of bounds.
You're right, Mike, because Mike, I guess I've been cut off. Mike, I was going to say exactly because
I think I'm losing my internet connection.
I will say publicly here, Mike is exactly right, because I've had several times over all these years I've been serving up here, had public come up and say, why did you approve that? Why, that's costing us taxpayers. Why are you doing this and that? I say we follow the code, but still people who are watching, and there's a lot who aren't here, are watching, and they come up and ask me or other commissioners, Why did you do that? How can you do that? Well, I tell them I have to approve it by the code or disprove it, but they still want to know, why are you spending that much money on something like that? We know, John knows, city commission may know, but the public doesn't always know because they don't watch every meeting religiously like we all do. Thank you.
You bet. Is there a motion from any of the commissioners?
I'll make a motion. Has it changed with the last letter we got? Do we have to do anything? It's just motion to approve GLUA-20-00016.
With the amended condition 32?
32.
With amended condition 32,
32, as Chair Mitchell pointed out.
as Chair Mitchell has pointed out.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
I'll second it.
Second.
Oh, I got 3 and 1. Who was first? I think I might make Commissioner Staggs. Okay, so moved by Commissioner Schlagenhofer, seconded by Commissioner Staggs to approve with amended conditions GLUA-20-00016. Call for the vote, please.
Commissioner Stoll?
Aye.
Commissioner Staggs?
Aye.
Commissioner Gage?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer?
Aye.
Commissioner Guile?
Abstain.
Chair Mitchell?
Aye.
Motion approved.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lewis and your staff and the presenters,
Thank you.
and Ms. Vasileva for the fine staff work.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Okay, moving on to the next item, communications, overview of the OC 2040 Community Conversations Kit, and I believe it's Mr. Walter.
Good evening, Commissioners. Just want to make sure that you can see my screen.
I can't see anything.
Yep. Okay, one moment.
We can you guys?
Yeah, it says OC 2040 Community Conversations Kit.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Is it full screen?
No.
No.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
Nope. You clicked what you just clicked at the bottom.
How's that?
Nope.
Yeah, that looks good.
This is where it slides. It
we
shows
got
the
slides.
projection of the next slide.
Oh, okay, gotcha. New share.
It's working.
How's that?
Perfect.
There.
Oh, great. Good evening, Commissioners. Pete Walter, Senior Planner. I hope you're all well. And this evening, I'm presenting an introduction to the Community Conversations Kit. As part of the OC 2040 Comprehensive Plan Update, Public Involvement Plan, Visioning Process, the Community Conversations Kit will be used to guide city staff, the project advisory team, and advisory board members to hold meetings and document community comments, and to ensure that our outreach process is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And staff is requesting that each planning commissioner facilitate at least 2 conversations. We're also requesting the same of each member of our 35-member project advisory team. 2 of you are on that. And our standing advisory committees, such as the Citizen Involvement Committee and Natural Resources Committee and others. So for extra credit, if you do more than 2, we will enter you into a drawing for a gift card or a certificate to one of Oregon City's great minority or women-owned bakeries and restaurants.
Not a new card.
And I can give you a list of what those are afterwards. So, Oregon was one of the first places in the United States to pioneer the use of community-based visioning as part of our land use planning program. And in a state that's recognized for innovative local planning and growth management, visioning is an important precursor to local planning and a tool that we can use to help communities better manage complex change. A comprehensive approach to visioning can be framed by using questions in this community conversations kit and the many ways to ask them. The kit will allow the user to choose the question that they feel best suits their audience. The kit will be available in English and Spanish and is available for download right now at our project website. And by the end of this week, I will be uploading a video explaining how to use the community conversation kit on YouTube. Here's our schedule. The community conversations are anticipated through the summer into October of 2020. And the creation and adoption of a community vision will occur in late fall, early winter. And that vision would inform the development of policy recommendations in the update to the comprehensive plan next year. The community conversation kits allow you to facilitate a discussion with a group, committees, clubs, and other organizations with which you're involved. These can be done virtually or in small, physically distant groups. And I'll be sharing some statistics from our online survey, which may help you choose with whom to hold a conversation. Community Conversations Kit will allow you to connect with the community wherever people gather and through channels which they receive information. The kit contains step-by-step instructions for conducting a conversation, including a preparation checklist, which allows you to assemble your pens and papers and what have you. You can also do it on a laptop or even on your mobile phone if you want to record it that way. There'll be a presenter's guide, and that takes you through the, 60 minutes for each conversation, and step by step. Discussion leader tips, and then the questions themselves, and then a template for how you should organize your notes, as well as a sign-in sheet. Oops. And there are multiple ways to ask the main thematic questions. This is an example of the first question in the list. Why did you choose to live and work in Oregon City? The discussion leader gets to choose which of those questions best fits the audience. And the important thing here is to be respectful of people's point of view, even if you disagree. And to accurately record your responses, and especially make note of frequently mentioned themes. And there's much more detailed instructions provided in the kit. So based on the results we're getting from the online vision survey, there's a need for greater participation by the youngest and oldest members of Oregon City. We also need to target greater participation by communities of color. And finally, there's a need for greater representation from households and individuals with limited income. About 3/4 of the respondents so far have household incomes greater than $50,000. And staff will also be directly facilitating community conversations with these groups, as well as relying on the diversity of our project advisory team to extend further into the community as we craft the vision for the next 20 years.
Pete, I have a question about that. Pete, I have a question about the income. A lot of people right now, even in my neighborhood, are on unemployment. So their income doesn't even apply at this point. Most of them are, when I've asked them what they're at, they don't have income to even report other than unemployment.
Yeah, I understand this current situation that everyone's living through is it's gonna really be important because.
So how do they respond?
Well, it's just a demographic question, Tom. They don't have to even answer this question if they're not comfortable answering it. We just tried to add that question in the survey as a way to track some of the information. That's what we're doing.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And Pete, did you give an update on how many people have taken the online survey, not the community conversation kit, but the online?
the online, I don't have an exact number, but I think we're well over 400 now. We may even get closer to 450. And the survey will be running through the end of the summer.
I'll add something in there, Pete. Also, we're talking about meetings. A lot of people don't want to attend meetings. So several of us, as you know, somebody from Oregon City Chit Chat has put it out there. I put it on Oregon City Raw. We have an HOA. You have to put it out that way. So there's other means to get the word out rather than having a meeting. And that is to put the word out on the internet, because there's so many Chit Chat lines now that people can go out from based on those, just to add that in there.
That's great, Tom. Yeah, no, thanks for mentioning that. We want to get the word out via Chit Chat and every other social media platform that we can. What we've been trying to do is drive people to the website itself, because that's the jumping off point for both the survey and also for downloading all the information about the project, including the community conversation kits and any upcoming meetings. So that's our intent.
Yes, and please, if you put it on Chit Chat or anywhere online, please make sure to capture that or screenshot and send us those results so we have them.
Well, don't they?
Yeah.
We're encouraging them to go to OC 2040 for the survey.
If you just asked the question, sorry, I was confused then. It was my bad.
Yeah, you put it out there. Please go to OC 2040 and respond to the survey questions.
I should clarify that
700 on my list now.
Yeah, there's two ways to enter in the information. You can either scan the written results once you've held your conversation, that's fine, and send them to us, just scanned, and we'll enter them in. Or you can go to the survey, because the questions are the same, and there's instructions in the Community Conversations kit about how to enter those into the survey itself, because basically you would enter the name of the community conversation that you're having, and that way that we'll know that that came out of a community conversation. So
Pete, another question I've been asked, is it anonymous? I started it today, but I didn't get to go through it, and I don't know if at the end, if it asks for particulars of your name and address. Several people have asked me, is it anonymous, because they don't want to provide names and information.
Yeah, it is anonymous. What it tracks is your computer number, whatever the IP address of the computer is. Yeah. But it doesn't ask for your name.
So part of that, Pete, then would be several people in a household. I was going to put it out to have people who have kids under 18. But if everybody in the household responds, and you're getting the same IP address over and over, husband, wife, kids. So you're going to look at several IP addresses.
How it works. I think once you do it once from the same computer, that's it.
So in other words, family shouldn't do it then. Just one person in the family then, and you're not going to get a good view of the kids or the whole husband and the wife.
We'll talk to our consultant about it.
Well, that's a really important point. That's a great question, Tom. And I'll check with our consultants on the technical side of that.
I get it all the time when I place orders.
Yeah. So if there's only one computer in the household and it's that's a really good point.
Thank you.
And then Pete, since they're all tasked with doing at least 2 community conversations, but they do such a good job, I'm sure they'll do more. Do they need to ask if someone has already taken a community conversation, and if they have, skip that person, or is it okay if the same person gets interviewed twice, or how do you want them to handle that?
Such a question.
I don't know. I will check with Steve Faust, our consultant, and we'll nail that one down. We're going to have our first project advisory team meeting coming up this Wednesday night, 6 p.m. So I'll try to get an answer well before then. But
Pete, as soon as you find out about the IP address, can you let me know? Because I've already started contacting people on HOAs and other places. And if they're going to waste their time with the kids and all that, I want to be able to reach out to them and say, then don't bother to respond, because only one person at your email address is going to be allowed, or your IP address. Let me know, or all the commissioners at some point soon, so we know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's probably more than one way to overcome that. Because you can, assuming the kids have cell phones, they could do the survey on the cell phone if they wanted to do the survey that way. But in terms of just the community conversations kit, and if they want to record multiple answers, that's fine. They would scan it and send it to us and check for answers that are coming up much more frequently, that kind of thing.
Because if we don't use a name.
We want to target youth for sure.
If we don't have a personal name, then you're not going to know who's repeating or not. And some of those people under 18 have no income whatsoever. So it's going to be zero, and that may skew your figures.
Well, it's not intended to be statistically valid. I just want to make that clear. What they are going to do is use some of the tools that are available in SurveyMonkey to see thematic themes and organize words that way, and there will be a way to capture that information and see what the most frequent topics are that are coming up in response to the questions. And our consultants are going to do that. But I wouldn't, if we're not planning for people to even answer demographic questions if they're not intending to, so, it wouldn't be biased that way.
Thank you for answering the questions.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Pete, I got a question for you.
Okay.
The question that the people are answering about their income, I'm struggling trying to interpret the answer there. So the way I see it, either people don't want to admit they don't make any money, or only people the majority are making over $100,000 a year, and then that's the people that are answering the survey, which doesn't sound like it's representative of a very diverse population. So,
good thought.
What do you think of that? What's the median income in Oregon City?
I mean, what's the question?
Well, is the median income in Oregon City over 100,000? According to that answer, it looks like it is, or at least that's who's answering this survey.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to break this down in more detail. This is just this slide is one slide from a summary of information that we've received, so it needs further explanation. What I think it's indicating is that, yeah, the people that are most participatory, obviously, are doing pretty well. And the people that aren't able to, either do for whatever reason, are not responding. So that's what we're really going to try to make the difference on.
Yeah, it worries me because it looks like that maybe the people that don't make any money don't feel like
they're participating.
They matter. Yeah. And it's not they're not worth listening to. That's how I'm kind of interpreting that.
I would take that thought, and when you do your community conversation, think about that.
Think about that. Hold that in your mind, and it really ought to help, broaden your perspective when we look at who's involved in city government and who isn't. We put together a very large and quite diverse project advisory team, and we deliberately extended the period for applications for the project advisory team to recruit not just a diversity of people from a racial perspective, but also the homeless advocacy group is represented on there by 4 participants and that sort of thing. So in addition to us actively engaging, and by that I mean going out and targeting multifamily projects and working through our police department, through our homeless liaison officer, and that kind of thing. That's the way we're going to try to pick up some of that population.
Patty had a question.
Mr. Gage, you had a question?
I do. On the question on income, is that household combined income or per individual being interviewed or on the survey?
I don't know.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. I can check.
Okay.
Commissioner Gile, you had a question?
No, I was just saying Patty in case somebody didn't see it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I have a question.
Commissioner Staggs.
Maybe it's a question that is a little difficult, but it seems like at this point in time right now in history and everything that's happening with the COVID virus and everything that's, people are unemployed, et cetera, I just want to ask the question, do we really feel like we're going to get the timing of doing all this right now is potentially an issue, and then we wouldn't get the kind of, I'm going to call it robust participation.
Honest answers.
Maybe we would have at a different time in history. And if that's the case, then I guess what could we do to make it better? If we just, assuming that we're going to keep going down this path of doing it now, then how can we even put more emphasis and more effort and more, like for example, are we going to have any public workshops as a part of this whole conversation where,
to the extent that we can hold face-to-face public gatherings, we're kind of reassessing as we go along. That's a question that we've actually received from not just members of the Planning Commission, but other people as well. Is this the right time to be moving forward with the comprehensive plan update process? And given all the unknowns with COVID-19, and our decision at that point was, yes, let's move forward because we don't know what the future holds. And also, we have the ability to switch to face-to-face public meetings to the extent that, our policies allow at City Hall. And the consultant and staff, when we were putting together the public engagement plan for this, right about the time that COVID hit in March, was when we had to scramble and think about that very question. And our decision was to continue to move forward. And so we shared the public engagement plan with you all, as well as the other commissions and committees, and the decision has been to move ahead. My hope is, based on what we're seeing in the online questionnaire, that there is a format and there is a response and a desire by the community to be involved in there and to remain involved with City Hall. And I'm hopeful that we can conduct a very robust public engagement process during this time.
Can I add something sorry.
I did a quick calculation earlier, and I'm not sure how accurate how many people live in Oregon City right now, but when I do a Google search, I get 37,339. I'm guessing that's probably from the last census, but I don't know that for sure. Does anybody know what the current population of Oregon City is?
I think
sounds about right.
That's your 2019 number. 2020 hasn't come out yet.
Right. And it comes from the PSU Demographic Research Center. That's where we get our estimate from.
Babies get to vote.
So when you look at respondents right now, we got 1%.
So I just wanted, this is Laura Tarr, I just want to caution a couple things. So one is, I thought it was 444 online respondents a week and a half ago, but that was when the postcard was coming out or something. It may not have been out very long. I want to caution us from putting so much emphasis on the way we used to do things, because the point of this project is to have a place for everybody to have a voice, and this room is empty a lot. It's empty a lot when we do open houses. I don't know how many open houses I have done where a handful of people, 2 handfuls of people come. So to having 444, which is a start and not done with the project, is one of the highest numbers I have ever seen out of the planning department. And so I think there's a couple things going on. One is there's online engagement is a little bit different right now, and maybe COVID is helpful for some of that online engagement, or people are a little bit more engaged. But also one of the points of this project and through these community conversations is really to not sit at City Hall and have people come to us, but to rely on you guys and all of our other project allies to go out there into the community and really talk to people. And it's good that you guys are having the conversation about some of these initial self-reported incomes, because that helps us just inform us that, you know, we should be going out to these other places. There's a variety of other tactics that Pete's using, like some special notices and some incentives to participate for communities of population that haven't participated before. So it's really, really exciting. And even if COVID was happening or not, how it's happening in such a neighbor-to-neighbor way or a community member-to-community member way is something that we really, really wanted. And we never really wanted to just sit here and have open houses. We rewrote our code how many times in the last couple of years, and how many people actually participated? Not that many.
I have a question for Lori. Lori, you mentioned that, did the postcards already go out, or, because our household's never received one. Did they go out recently, or going to go out?
I'll let Pete catch this.
That, and also part of the question is,
about 18,000 postcards out.
Pete, part of that question is, did it go to all 97045 addresses, which includes way out to Bradley Road and almost to Carver and Beaver Creek, or did it just go to those within the Central Oregon City voting public?
The urban growth boundary, every taxpayer and resident. So we normally, if we do a public notice, we just do the taxpayer. This time we did residents of all multifamily projects included, as well as all UGB residents that we're aware of. So it was approximately 18,000 mailings.
Okay, Pete. Part of that question is because I've always been heavy on communications, and there's people that go further out that I've had arguments with online saying, well, we're Oregon City. I'm going, no, you're beyond our city limits. You're out on Bradley Road or Carver, or you're way out in Beaver Creek. And they feel that they spend a lot of time business at our restaurants and about Oregon City, and they feel excluded if we don't go to all the addresses on 97045. And they are a part of our community, even if they're not a voting public. You know what I mean? Because there's people far out. Our 97045 code goes out Beaver Creek almost to Lower Highland Road, and it goes further out in different directions. And if they don't get invited to participate, they're going to feel like, well, they don't care about our business in downtown Oregon City. And the second part of that question was, I'm not sure if I saw it. I pick up the Oregon City newspaper, or it's now Pamplin Group. Did we get an article in the Pamplin? Did our director here of communications put anything in the local newspaper to let people know who pick up that paper?
Good point. We've always just used the urban growth boundary because that's where we can control our planning processes within it, and that's where our comprehensive plan jurisdiction ends. We do have a limited budget. I know the zip code for Oregon City can go up to 5 miles beyond the UGB. That, you know, I don't know how many people that encompasses, but I'm sure it's way more than we have the budget for contacting.
Like Holly Lane.
We're dealing with a lot of county. The urban growth boundary, what's that?
I said, like Holly Lane is part of the whole Park Place concept plan in a sense, but they're not part of UGB. But Holly Lane goes to Maple Lane. It's all part of the Oregon City mix of Redland Road. And they always complain to us when we've had meetings, we don't get any mailings. We're 97045. We're right next to the city. We're just not in the UGB. But they use all our roads and go to all our stores.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
I don't think there's any way that an IP address on a computer is going to know whether or not it's inside or outside the UGB. I think somebody outside, if they hear about this, the online survey through social media or the newspaper or however, all the ways we've been promoting it, they're not going to get a postcard, but they still could do the survey, and I don't think it's going to get tossed out because I don't think that IP address knows.
No, it's not that, Mike. I'm just saying if a lot of people who don't come to the meetings anymore because of COVID, and if they don't know about it through any other means other than a postcard, they're not going to participate and they're going to feel left out, like most of Holly Lane has always complained about.
Well, they're going to hear that. They can hear about it from all the other means except for a postcard. I get it. I hear what you're saying.
We got to communicate better to the public has always been my situation. Actually, I'm addressing it tonight on Oregon City Raw. Read it. Go ahead, Pete, sorry.
Oh, no, I don't have anything more. Thank you.
Did you have a rest of your presentation that we all interrupted with questions?
No, I'm finished. Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
But I appreciate you.
Pete, we download the actual kit to use from the website, right?
Yeah, you can go there right now and download it. Like I said, I'm going to be uploading a video by the end of the week that explains the steps in the kit in a little more detail. Hopefully that people find that a little more approachable than reading through the kit, but they can, it'll be sort of an interactive video where I'll be going through the kit on the screen, explaining it page by page.
Any other questions?
No.
I had a question.
Yeah, Commissioner Staggs.
Maybe I missed this, but who is the group? Who's the consultant?
The consultant that that's helping with us for the public engagement plan is 3J. And we also have sub-consultants who are working on an economic analysis paper, doing all the background research for the comprehensive plan itself when we start doing the goals and policies in 2021. That's Echo Northwest. And so they're on there too.
And 3J is primarily
they're a land use planning and public engagement firm. It's done work. They actually were the consultants on the Beaver Creek Road concept plan implementation and rezoning piece as well. And they've done quite a bit of work in Oregon City, including the South End concept plan. And they were a very good fit when we put out the request for proposals last year.
Okay, thanks.
I'd ask what the budget is, but that's probably outside my purview.
Nope, not this time. It's okay. You can ask.
Laura, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. The city, what is our overall project budget? I'm forgetting. So the city, I think, has about $50,000. There is $150,000 from a grant through Metro, through a Transportation Growth Management grant, and there's a $42,000
Oregon Department of Transportation.
Yes, $42,500 from Department of Land Conservation Development grant as well. So we patched together two different granting sources with just a little bit of staff money or money from the city as well to get actually quite a big package. So we're very excited.
$500,000 or less?
Oh, less. Yeah. It's 250. Yeah.
Yeah, did that quick?
42,500. Yeah.
242,500. There you go.
Don't want to ask the wrong question here.
And staff time, which is not accounted for, but yeah.
Well, I'd say to what Commissioner Staggs said earlier on about, is this the right time? I had email conversations with Pete and Laura several months ago with a lot of those same concerns, and I think the good news, I'm reminded years ago I got hired for a job, and the guy that hired me said, the good news is you get to help write the rules. The bad news is you have to help write the rules. and we're kind of in this spot here because we're forced to not do it the way we used to and sit at City Hall and wait for people to show up to a public meeting. And I think Laura and Pete and the consultants that, I know that this was never going to be, just a plain series of public meetings. I think they'd always been thinking that it needed to be more than that. But with what's going on in the world, in a lot of fronts, not just COVID-19, everybody knows that we've got to be a lot more aggressive in our outreach. And I think that's going to prove to be good news, that we knew we had to be aggressive and we're going to watch it all the way through. So, okay, enough from me.
Let me just say a couple of things. Mike, I totally agree with you. I asked the question earlier not because I don't want to do this now, because I think you're right. I think we're all right that now may be a just fine period of time to do this. One thing that one of the reasons that I moved to Oregon City back a couple of years ago is because I came to those public workshops that were being done for the Riverwalk project, and those I thought were really amazingly done, and there was amazing turnout to those workshops and those public meetings with Snowhetta and the city and everyone involved. So, and that leads me to a question I have for Laura. Was that seen as a highly successful series of events for Oregon City? I know not in terms of what we've accomplished with the Riverwalk yet, but was that seen as a public participation kind of milestone in the city?
It was, but I would also say that we targeted participation from the region, so there was a lot of people that weren't from Oregon City that attended those as well.
Communications.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a budget to match.
Yeah.
And you know what I would say too? I would say, why would we not reach out to the larger Portland community in this effort as well?
Good question, Chris.
I mean, we will actually get a lot of, I think, some interesting and very relevant comments from other communities. Why would we not invite other communities to participate in this as well?
Exactly
and I don't
my
really
question,
answer that
Chris.
question before asking the question.
It's a good question. There's probably multiple answers. I think we do have some people on our project advisory team who are from outside Oregon City. One of our participants is a Milwaukee, I think, resident and that sort of thing. We always struggle with that. I mean, I know that certain Oregon City residents and sometimes, don't understand how they fit into the greater metro area region and that sort of thing. And part of the education process that we'll be using is to explain how the comprehensive plan works in the context of the urban growth boundary. And when we do our housing needs analysis and our market analysis, that's going to be by necessity based on a regional market analysis and that sort of thing. That doesn't really get to what you're concerned about. I think what you're concerned about is, what is the regional perception of Oregon City and what perspectives do people outside Oregon City have about Oregon City's future, which is an excellent question.
Well, I'm equally as interested in getting sort of outside perspectives on what we're doing.
Yeah, right.
Having people, because, I think we have a fair amount of diversity here in Oregon City, but it's always nice to get outside perspectives on what you're doing to kind of bounce ideas off of, so that we're not just kind of thinking about ourselves and what we're going to do here in Oregon City. I think we've got just on the Planning Commission and people involved in many walks of life in Oregon City. I think there's a lot of diversity that will have different opinions about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is just getting out there and getting those opinions and those ideas out in the open where we can have discussions about them. So
that's a good point. Great point. Something that we should definitely bear in mind as we design the future surveys as well, because there's going to be more than one. And then when we get into the actual writing of the comprehensive plan in 2021 and drafting goals and policies and that sort of thing, that'll be an important perspective.
Chris, that was exactly what I was getting at, because a lot of people are deciding, do I want to move to Oregon City? What about a business? What about individuals? And Mike may have seen it. Somebody recently said, I just moved to Oregon City. What do you like or not like about Oregon City? Did you see that one, Mike? So many people came out and said, Oregon City was a disaster. I'm so glad I moved away from there. It's getting too big. Other people were saying, I put out about our elevator and our waterfalls and everything else and our restaurants. But it was interesting comments that people responded to that new person, and I couldn't believe the amount of negativity about Oregon City. And I'm going, several people who lived here, and I'm going, then why did you move here if you don't like it here? And or why, if you moved away, why are you still following us on Chit Chat? Did you see those at all, Mike? It's true. All these people who move away and then still want to comment and want to be negative about our city. So when Chris brings that up, it is true that we need to reach out beyond just our borders, because people are coming here or people are hearing things about our mayor or this or that. Thank God we're not Portland. I was down there yesterday. But we need to reach beyond to get more of an impact. I agree with Chris.
Good point. Anything else on this topic from anybody? Okay, I don't see anything, so we'll move on. Laura, any other? Pete, thank you very much for that presentation. That was great.
Thanks for the great questions and comments. I really appreciate that.
Laura, anything else from you or your staff?
No, I do not have any communications this evening.
Okay. Anything else from any of the commissioners for the good of the order? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.